Hey everybody, Doug here from 2 Plus Stuff, and Games Workshop was kind enough to send me an advanced copy of Beastgrave, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So what I'm going to do is break down the box, what you get inside of it, as well as talk about some of the cool changes, which they've already previewed really on the community page, but my thoughts on the warbands that can be used in AOS, and also how they kind of, the changes they made affect the game as a whole. All right, so here we are at the hobby desk with Beastgrave, and I will shimmy this loose. I did go ahead and bust open the wrapping just to make sure everything was there so I wouldn't have an embarrassing moment when I went to go record. Man, this thing is stiff. Okay. Okay, there we go. So we got that off. We have the rule book, the quick start guide, the preview for other stuff. Basically just to get your toe into Age of Sigmar proper, basically. Build instructions. Again, if you're not familiar, the thing with all the Underworlds warbands is they're always snap fit. I do recommend clipping off the pegs just like a little bit, just a smidge, because otherwise sometimes they're a little bit too long and they have models poking out. So here's the build instructions for that's everybody. Okay, cool. Then we have our brand new tiles, new sets of tokens. We'll come back to these. Like I said, there's changes to the way tokens and tiles and all that kind of stuff works. And then we get to the warbands. So we have, this are the Kurnothi. Now they've already said in the community article that went out, I believe it was yesterday, that the Kurnothi can be used in Sylvaneth. Now, people have been asking, like, does that mean they're not getting their own army? They're not going to be their own thing? I have no idea. I don't not preview to anything, but they are incredible models, and I'm interested to see their rules for AOS for sure. So put that to the side. And then there's the Beasts of Chaos, who's being led by a shaman. So yeah, let's take a look at these guys here. In there also you have, let's see, so these are extra cards for deck building. So you have a pre-made deck for the Scaleth's Wild Hunt, and Grashrax Despoilers is the name of the two warbands. You get a whole bunch of baggies to store everything, which I appreciate this. I appreciate that so much. It's a little thing, but it's a huge deal. I wish that, what is it, Warcry came with more. And then your dice for everything you need. Of course, magic is now pretty much a staple thing in all the warbands going forward. So there's your magic dice in there. Extra cards for deck building, and whatever this is. Oh, a little art piece. That's kind of cool looking. I might frame that. Okay, cool. And I think that is it. Totally empty. So let's take a better look at rules and stuff like that. Okay, let's have a look-see. So we have our token set, which I think is 2 or 3 of these boards. 3. Okay, there we go. And one thing that's going to become important in just a sec is the fact that before, the back sides of the objective tokens, as far as I can remember, it didn't matter a ton. But in this one, each side has a numbered side, and the other side is like this nasty maw-looking thing, becoming a lethal hex. Now that'll matter in just a bit, but of course you also get your like scatter determination thing, and everything else you need. So glory points, blood points, that kind of stuff. And we get our boards. And the only reason I wanted to point these out is the art on them looks incredible, and I don't remember my Shadespire set is packed away, but I don't remember it having such a nice matte finish. So I think maybe they caught on to the fact that people use these as backdrops for their, like, taking pictures of models, and it looks way nicer, like instantly nicer. So we have, let's see, this one. We have 3 blocked hexes. I don't see any lethals off the. Here we go. And I'll share this one here. You can pause it if you're super interested in how these look. This has a ton of really nicely clumped together deployment spots. I like that. So what's the back side of this one? Not as many with lethal hexes as I thought there would be. Only 2 of the 4 do, which is interesting. We'll talk more about that. And then we get to the core book. So in the beginning of the book is a little bit of lore that I'll be covering in future videos. Talking about the various factions. I need to learn more about them before I talk intelligently. And I want to touch on some of the cooler changes to the rule set. So I have played Shadespire a little bit. I went to a little few pickup games when I was at Nova, just like 2. And I played locally for a little while. You guys saw my hobby haul when I got a crap ton of stuff from Jack over at Rolling Ones. And so I'm looking at this, trying to spot the differences, and they're minor. Like, I'm sorry, rewind that. They're few differences, but they are big in consequence, right? So, for example, we'll skip. I read briefly over here. I didn't see much about changing the way we set up the board or anything like that, but the big difference comes when it says place feature and lethal hex token. So, when before, you and your opponent would shake up all the objective tokens and then randomly place them across the board. You still do that. But in Beastgrave, after you've done that, you set them, you flip them, you and your opponent both get to place a lethal hex. So you get to make the board more dangerous. One thing that it says, though, is that you can place a lethal hex token. Where is it at? A hex which includes one or more lethal hex tokens is treated in every way as a lethal hex, meaning if you really don't want to place a lethal hex anywhere, just put it on one that already exists, and it doesn't get any more lethal, it just is what it is. So that's an interesting idea. So you can make the board more dangerous, more cramped, especially if you choose those deployment styles very, very carefully with the impassable hexes, and then you put a deadly one or a lethal one right in between them, that kind of stuff. And then throughout the game, this is interesting, you can actually flip objective tokens. By that I mean, their example here is objective number 4. And so there are effects, spells, and abilities in the game that allow you to flip that over to becoming a lethal hex. Now it says very clearly that if you are a model standing on that hex while it is flipped, you don't take damage. It's only if you're kind of knocked into it. If you leave and come back, you'll take damage, that kind of thing. But what my question is that I'm unsure of, I need to find out more by reading the book thing a little bit more, but I couldn't find it in the rules quickly, was if you switch number 4 into a lethal hex, does it still count as number 4? If, for example, you are a fire slayer and you want to sit on objectives, does it no longer count as objective number 4? My gut tells me no, that there's an ability of denial that they've added to the game that lets you kind of break apart those strategies. So, kind of pulls away a little bit from the defensive nature, just sitting on objective and defending it kind of thing. But to go along with that, one of the actions changed significantly. Where is it at? I must have passed it. Basically, the defend action, as they said on the community page, and I read it here before, now I can't find the page for it. But basically, the defend action used to just kind of increase your odds of being able to block an attack. However, now they've done it to where you don't get knocked back. So it's an interesting idea where all of a sudden you can now control where your model is and how defensive they are on a specific spot. They can't get bumped off an objective. And I like that quite a bit, actually. So I'm looking through here. Any differences? Not really a ton. Out of action still works the same. They just... You know what it is? If you're not familiar with how Games Workshop releases their games, if you're new to Games Workshop as a company, like maybe you came from Magic, they have this kind of like ongoing process where they'll release the first edition of a game, and then a second edition will add a whole bunch of new cool things, and then the third iteration will have basically just a consolidated, cleaned up, well-worded, conglomeration of the first two, and it's exactly what this is. I want you to think of Beastgrave as exactly that. It just takes the stuff that was already there, because Shadespire existed, and then they bolted on Night Vault, which kind of just had magic, and then some of the factions weren't really quite balanced for it, and all kind of stuff. With Beastgrave, they've trimmed off some of the cards by rotating out the first season of non-faction specific stuff, and they just consolidated the wording a bit more, and gave more players a chance to kind of engage with the board itself by doing the lethal hex and flipping the tokens and that kind of stuff. So I think that is a cool mechanic that can really help factions that don't have magic, being able to manipulate the board space. Everything else pretty much is very similar. There are some minute changes, but for the most part, the sequencing is the same. The way that gambits work, I was looking at, or is it the when you end phase, when you count up like your objectives cards, how you score and that kind of stuff. They call them surge objective cards now, where it's the score immediately thing. You still get a card back, and there's still some same rules. They kind of codified that a little bit, make it a little more clear as to, like, you know, if you get an objective that you just scored and you can't daisy chain all your immediately cards. And they just kind of like gave some really cool wording to kind of defining the different types of objectives. So one is a dual objective. So if it says if you have, you know, for example, objective 4 and objective 5, you know, kind of putting the vocabulary out there for like, this is what it means to have two objectives. It doesn't mean or, it means and, you have to have both, that kind of stuff. And then obviously the scatter thing right here, it's not confusing. It just kind of seems time consuming. It's kind of always been my thought with the scatter thing. And then it goes into your standard, what do they call them? Alternative rules? I was going to say adjacent rules. As far as adding multiple players, it's got designs for up to 4 players, and how the activation phase works when everybody's going crazy. As well as, and this is one of my favorite things that they have always done with these, is a nice thick glossary. Because when I first read the lethal hex, where you and your opponent can throw down lethal hex, I just came here to the section, looked it up, like, sweet, that's awesome. It's not just page references, it's actually the rules written out nicely for you, and on the back is a perfect little reference sheet. So, I absolutely love this thing. What's nice is they actually have this nice diagram, because instead of just writing out the words, and I'll try to hold up to the camera here a little bit better, of like, you know, if your opponent has one critical success and you have one critical failure, like, you know, writing out how that works. They literally just made a chart so you can compare stuff, especially helpful for like younger players who maybe get caught up in the wording a little bit. And then it goes, straight to the combat sequence. It's a whole little diagram to walk you through the game in its entirety. And my favorite thing is, I wish Warcry did this too, where they walk you through how to set up like all of the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the order of operations for everything, right? Because Warcry is very order of operations heavy to set up the game. And then once it's set up, it goes very quickly. But this has order of activations for how you score stuff, the action phase, that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think it's a fantastic little thing. As far as like just like a reference guide, it has everything you'd want for it. You know, it has more resources in it than I would think. Well, certainly more than I think Night Vault had. I feel like that one was a little bit light. And this is certainly just an improvement on it. So, now I'm going to switch over to checking out the deck of cards here. And we're just going to highlight a few of them, get a sense for what they're like. Okay, everybody, we're back here with Grash Axe Despoilers and Scale's Wild Hunt. Sorry, my rig is kind of more set up for the painting thing than it is like, you know, zooming in close up on cards. But I'll walk through them basically with you. So we'll start over here. I want to talk about kind of the general theme that I get from these cards. So I'll talk about the Beasts of Chaos, the Despoilers first. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fighters in that faction. Looks like we have 2, 3, 4 of them are hunters. If you're not familiar with Age of Sigmar stuff, I'll go through it. But basically, 4 little dudes who are very, very weak. Their stats, they can move 4 hexes each, they have 1 dodge, and they go between 3 and 2 health, right? They're, again, very, very weak. They dodge on like the little dodge symbols, not on shields. And let me just look at their condition to go Super Saiyan here. 2 or more enemy fighters are out of action. And that's the same for every single one of them. And I love that. That means when that does happen, the entire... let me just double check here, but I'm pretty sure the entire warband will go hog wild as soon as you take out 2 enemies. Then also you have a what is called, I believe it's supposed to be a Bestigor, which is kind of a more elite infantry option in the Beasts of Chaos army. He has 1 shield for his kind of save, 3 wounds, and his attack is pretty solid. 2 hammers and does 3 damage. So when he goes Super Saiyan, becomes gifted. Basically, he gains cleave, and the attack gets a little more beefy. Goes up to 3 instead of 2. Goes to 3 swords instead of 2 shields. Okay. And then for your hero is Grashrak Fellhoof himself. Got 4 wounds to his name. Again, lightly armored, that kind of stuff. They're not the tankiest dudes. He is a wizard, I believe. Yep, wizard. And at the start of the game, whenever the enemy fighter is taken out of action, a ritual counter, well, probably put a ritual counter on this card. During a friendly fighter's attack action, before the attack roll, remove a ritual counter from this card. If you do, you can re-roll one dice from that attack roll. So basically, as people are dying, he's kind of storing up that, I don't know, death power, death magic, whatever it is, just the carnage, and then can boost his army as he sees fit. So that is neat, especially in tandem with your big powerhouse heavy hitter here. The spell is the exact same on the back, but he goes from being a wizard level 1 to a wizard level 2. So that's pretty sweet. And so kind of the theme, I'll put these guys to the side here for a sec. The theme for this deck is aggression and mobility. If you're not familiar with how the faction works in Age of Sigmar, it's very, very similar. For example, choose up to 2 friendly hunters and push them 2 hexes each. Well, your basic hunter guys we already looked at have movement of 4. Okay, so that goes up to movement 6. In addition to that, there is a spell, Bestial Vigor. If cast, friendly fighters have +2 move in the next activation. So that is huge. And they are stackable. And this one is Berserk Bellow. Choose an enemy fighter adjacent to a friendly fighter and push them up to 1 hex and up to 1 additional hex for each wound token they have suffered. So you're really trying to slam them hard. I remember you're having a lot more lethal hexes in this game, or at least this new iteration of it. And so I gave a good look at. One thing I will note about both these decks really quickly is there's a lot more faction-specific cards than I feel like there were in the others. Maybe I'm wrong. But I like it. And so, I don't know, the faction has a lot of definition to it. It is very much, everything's focused on like movement, and there's a few objective cards as far as like being in the right place at the right time, which you have the movement to get there. And then, of course, obviously just being aggressive. Now, if we look over at Skelth's Hunt, there is Skelth the Huntsman, and he is a melee character. The Inspire condition for all of them is this fighter has a charge token at the end of the phase. So also focus on being aggressive, but they do some really cool different stuff. The theme of this deck, from what I can see in here, is manipulating the game state, right? Messing with your opponents, what tokens they have, and that's very important. Let's see. Javelin of the Hunt. This fighter can only make a Javelin of the Hunt attack action once per game. It has +1 damage when it's made as part of a charge action, and it's has 3 hex range, 2 hammers, and 1 damage. There's a card in there that lets you basically do it a second time if you want to spend that, like an upgrade card. And when he gets inspired, basically gains a shield as part of her save, and that looks to be about it. So it goes up in defense a little bit, unless I'm missing something. Now, there is also a wizard here who is not the main character. That's interesting. And let's see, that's the only one with an ability here. Hunting Horn. Put a horn counter on this card. When there is a horn counter on this card, sorry, that's an action. Put a horn counter on the card. When there is a horn counter on this card, re-roll any number of dice in the next attack roll made for friendly fighters, attack action, then remove the horn counter. So gives you a chance to help somebody else get some re-rolls, and that's pretty sweet. And the rest, they all pretty much are looking at 4 to 5 movement on the hexes, 1 to 2 dodge, and then 2 and 3 health each. The only noticeable dude... Oh, he also goes up in wizard level when he becomes inspired. And then the other guys are interesting. So there's 2 basic bros, that's what I'll call them. Chumps, if you will. And basically for them, I'm looking at their profiles, trying to see what's different. It looks like they get faster as they get injured, or as they get inspired. So they get to move more. So after you've done your charges, you get inspired, and then all of a sudden you move faster for the next attack. And then there's also a lion. This is the one we saw a while ago, the kind of chipmunk-looking lion thing. This fighter cannot be given attack actions, upgrades, and cannot hold objectives. So it's just a rabid beast. It's going to run around just smashing stuff. So no upgrades, no objectives. That's fine. Has a movement of 5, 1 dodge, and only 2 life. But when you flip it over, what does it get? It gets an extra dodge and 1 more die when it tries to attack. So not the strongest, but there's something interesting about this deck. And I picked out just a few cards to kind of exemplify what I'm talking about with their theme. And I picked out, 4 here? And they're very interesting. So they're going to really focus on controlling, like I said, the tokens that you and your opponent's models have. So for example, choose a friendly fighter that has 1 or more move tokens on them. Remove 1 of those tokens. So all of a sudden your guy who moved can move again. That's an interesting one. Your leader is no longer considered to have made a Javelin of the Hunt attack action. That's what I talked about before. You can do your long spear attack. Fleet of Foot. Choose a friendly fighter that has no move or charge tokens. They make a move action. So that's cool. And that's really interesting because that way you can, if you are already engaged, you can kill the person you fought with, right? You as your attack action. And then all of a sudden you get to move again afterwards, so they didn't take anything from you. And there's a Gambit spell here, Binding Wind. If cast, choose an enemy fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. Give that fighter a move token, so you can lock someone down. And that's what I mean when I say you're interfering with tokens. There's many more like that in here. Both decks are quite a few spells for all their little casters. Stuff like that. We'll take a look at the last set here. This is the extra cards. But honestly, like that's kind of what I have to say. I'm like I said, I'm not an expert at the game. I don't claim to be. In here, there's some more objective tokens for both sides, which is fantastic. And some more faction-specific ones. That's really what I mean when I say I feel like there's just a lot of very faction-specific ones. I think that's the direction they're headed. For example, out of this entire deck, that's all that's universal, and this is all faction specific to these 2 warbands, and I think that's good to me personally. I know not everyone agrees with me, but really do enjoy it. A lot of these are duplicates to one that you already get in the deck, so if you buy this with a group of friends, you can actually hand these out to some folks. What I will say is that people have been going nuts over the appearances of other factions that don't currently exist in Underworlds. The idea being they're going to get new armies. And so what I can say to that is there is Flesh Eater Courts, there is the Goblin Wolf Riders we've seen before, there's a Nurgle champion looking dude, like a Blight King, inside the boxes that already, the decks that are already pre-built, I mean. And what else is there? That looks like an ogre. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So anyway, let me just pack all these things up and I'll kind of close out my thoughts. So everybody, that is Beastgrave, the new edition, I guess you could say, expansion for Warhammer Underworlds. New season, I think is what they call it. And I gotta say, I'm very impressed. And here's the thing I will say about it. Part of the problem with Warhammer Underworlds for a little while was getting new people into it. I was fortunate enough to get a whole bunch of stuff all at once from someone who just kind of hoards things. Thanks, Jack. And basically, that was my personal on-ramp on, but I do see in the Warhammer Underworlds community a lot of people being like, where do I start? And the common answer that they get, much to my chagrin, is like, drop up a bunch of money, or don't start because it's such an investment, because you need to have so many things. Now, this doesn't necessarily change that. It's still good. If you want to be at the competitive level of playing this game, you will need to make an investment in other warbands. But I think their general shift away from faction non-specific cards is kind of an indicator that they want to focus on, when you buy something, the cards that you get in there are usable for the game and you can just jump in, right? I think that's a good pivot to make. Obviously, for the people who want every resource available to them, you're going to want to buy everything anyway. But for the average player who just, kind of like your average casual Magic the Gathering player, you can walk in, you can grab this set. There are, like I showed you before, most of this stack of extra cards is faction specific. So you take one of your 2 armies and you make something cool with them. And you do have some non-specific cards to play around with as well. As far as the models go, I'm in the process of building them. Like I kind of did that in between segments of this. They look fantastic, snap together very easily, and I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. So friends, thank you so much for kind of checking this out with me. If you are someone who's interested in Beastgrave, go ahead and tell me what you're excited for down below. Or if you're someone who is just trying to figure out how to get in Underworlds, I will tell you this is probably a really good set, especially because the rules have been kind of solidified a little bit from the first 2 seasons, and it gives you a lot of resources to get started. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.
Hey Wargamers, Doug here. If you like the show, help the channel grow. Consider becoming one of my patrons over on Patreon. My patrons are vital to help decide the direction of the channel, and patrons of a certain level are automatically entered to win whatever battle tome I just finished reviewing. And I'll ship it anywhere worldwide. But more than that, it's an invitation to be part of a great group that wants to serve the wargaming community as a whole. Click the link in the description down below and you'll be brought over to my Patreon page, which is bursting with helpful information and will answer a lot of questions you may have. For as little as $1 a month, you can support me and make this channel possible. Thank you all so much for your consideration, and happy wargaming.